Melissa Doman, thank you so much for joining me. I'm really happy that you made the time to speak with me. You are a certified sleep consultant, and you've worked with families with special needs kids, specific needs kids for many years. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Carla.
This is a topic that I feel many parents have issues with and challenges with, but they don't know who to consult with. They'll ask many times. They'll ask a psychologist or a therapist or even a teacher to help them with their child's sleep routine. And I'm so happy to see that there are more certified and specialized people that are actually working in that field. So I'm really excited to ask you a few questions.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if we stay on the topic of sleep for our kids, maybe diagnosed with autism or a related condition, why do you feel that they have certain sleep patterns that are irregular or a bit difficult to maintain the consistency of?
Yeah. No, it's a great question. And the way I explain it to my parents, because I think first of all, like you said, many parents of kids with special needs, they see some really unusual things with their child's sleep. I mean, I've had 2 and 3-year-olds who can be up for 5 hours a night and seem to be okay the next day. And I think that would raise any red flags for a parent. So, so when I explain it to parents, I usually say it does kind of boil down to what's happening neurologically. So when a child has any kind of developmental delay, the brain has to work that much harder. It has to put that much more energy into making sure any new abilities that are developed stay put. So it's almost like the brain is kind of like in a survival mode of like, okay, no, we just got this. Like, we need to make sure this sticks. So sometimes what that means is that it's going to greatly disrupt the sleeping patterns, and that's just because the brain is already doing so much work at night. So like it's almost as if it's trying to multitask like way too much stuff. So it's not unusual. And I think a lot of parents, when they talk to me, they think that their child is the only one doing it. But I guess the silver lining to all of it is that no, it's actually fairly common. And it actually means that there are good things happening from a developmental standpoint. It just, the runway of making sure all of those things are solid just is a bit longer, because of those additional needs.
That makes a lot of sense, just the way that you explain that process, because our kids are receiving so much stimulation that their brains are already in overdrive when they need the sleep. They're constantly thinking what they learned. And even if you take a step back from that, I feel like our kids, many of our kids have ADHD or other comorbid conditions, and they're already thinking way too much.
Yeah.
And for them to, I mean, it's maybe not too much, but it is in overdrive. So they might be overthinking already. Exactly. And if you can calm them down, but then the other problem is like what you mentioned now is the therapy and the treatment and the stimulation that they're receiving. So what do we do? How do we calm our kids?
Well, it's interesting you're asking this question, because this is like a very big and busy time of the year for a lot of kids, because we're all just coming off a summer vacation. Therapy is ramping up. Kids are starting school or even just going to daycare. So there's a lot of that overstimulation during the day. So the first thing that I recommend to my parents is anything that is new or is increasing in the amount of time or the amount of hours. The first couple weeks of that, you should be putting your child to sleep at least 15 to 30 minutes earlier, because chances are they're already going to sleep overtired, which overactivates those different areas of the brain that are processing, sensory inputs, language, behavior, balance. So like all of that is already out of whack when you're overtired. So by putting them to bed a little bit earlier, it gives them just a little bit more time to process all of that stimulation that they get through the day. And I'm a big proponent of a lot of tactile input, not just for kids who are seekers or who need that stimulation, but there's something very parasympathetic of just having that kind of hands-on stimulation, whether it's a massage, a joint compression massage. Some of my families do like contrasting sensations or like certain brushing protocols, and doing a bit more of that after school, after therapy, as a child is adjusting to that new schedule can be super helpful. So any one of those elements just, again, helps to get that nervous system calmed down a little bit more before bedtime. But always erring on the side of actually putting kids to bed a little too early helps to make that process and to make those wake ups or anything like that happening at night just happen less.
It also gives them, I feel like, time to process, okay, this is the time that I need to calm down, and I need to get into that mode of it's switching off my thoughts a little bit and going into sleep mode.
Yeah. And I Carla, I mean, I know you mentioned kids with ADD, ADHD, and one thing I do with some of my older kids is we will do, like, before bedtime, kid and parents and child will sit down and maybe write some things that happened during the day, or what are the things that are on your mind. This was something I learned coaching adults initially, and I've modified it for kids with ADHD whose brains are constantly running. And for me, that's me every single night. My husband jokes, like, I've got a notebook by my bed to write all that stuff down, so it's kind of like out of mind and don't have to worry about it. But
that's a very practical solution, because you're kind of telling yourself, okay, now it's done, it's on paper. Now I can start focusing on being calm, going to bed. I love that example. I also really like the sensory input. Because our kids some are hypo and some are hypersensitive to sensory input, but they all require some form of a sensory profile. And if you can focus on it even more so closer to bedtime, I feel like it gives them that sense of calm that we all need. All of these strategies that you've used can work so well for myself, because I struggle sleeping too. So I'm going to take note for myself here too. Why do you feel, Melissa, it's a struggle for our kids specifically? I know you mentioned that their brains are really busy, but is there something else going on that parents don't know of that you feel that they should consider or that they should look into?
Well, I do find that one thing that is very commonly overlooked by doctors, therapists, teachers are the habits that we all learn around sleep, and not unlike any neurotypical child. Every child learns their own way of getting to sleep. And I would say probably 90% of the kids that I work with, they rely on mom or dad in some way to get to sleep. And yes, there's all the neurological things going on, in addition to maybe not so great habits around bedtime and that whole procedure. So what I often find is that when a child is given that space to learn their own independent strategies, and it's done at a pace that is right for them, and they can process and learn and be successful with it. Ultimately, a lot of the really unusual things we see, like big long wake ups or 10 or more wake ups at night or super early mornings, that kind of gets resolved because the child at that point, even if they do wake up, they're like, oh, I just do X, Y, and Z, and I'm back to sleep. But when they need to be held or rocked, or they need to have somebody like right next to them, or they have to have their hands under mom's, shoulders, or whatever that is, driving around the neighborhood. I've had a few kids who need to do that to get to sleep. If they wake up in the middle of the night and they don't have that help, they're going to have a very hard time getting back to sleep. And it can be a very startling experience too. It would be like if you go to sleep with a pillow and blanket and then you're up 2 hours later and they're gone. Right.
Yes, exactly. It's
Yeah.
so important to implement strategies that can lead to independence with our kids, because
Yeah.
ultimately we want them to not just be aware of their sensory needs and their sleep patterns and how to fall asleep, but also to regulate this. So we're starting with helping our kids, providing that input, but then ultimately we want them to give that input themselves so that
Yeah.
they can self-regulate. And
Yeah.
yeah, I think that is a very important point, because your example of driving around, we often find that with our parents, where they say,
Yeah.
well, the only time he's calm is if he's in a car, but
Yeah.
you can't drive around. Well, you can, but you don't want to drive around, I would say, at
No.
3 a.m. before.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's just not practical. It's not cost effective either. I mean, the thing that I love about it is like for kids with special needs, like so often the focus is on what they're not going to be able to do on by themselves. Like everybody gets that like terrible prognosis from the therapist or the doctor of like, this will never happen, this can't happen, whatever. But like independence and sleep, it really doesn't matter where your child's abilities are or where they don't have abilities yet. Like everything can be adapted to them and to develop that. And very often, like this is like the first thing that they learn how to do independently. And I think that can be a really big motivator for parents to say like, oh, they actually could do this. So what about potty training? What about this? What about that?
Gotcha. That's always the second one: sleep and then potty training.
Yeah, always.
I have a friend that's in her 30s, and she still uses a bedtime lamp, and it's a very calming lamp. But is that something that you would say is a good strategy to implement, like a night lamp?
Yeah, it can be. And actually, funny enough, you know, like a typical sleep recommendation is like, you know, you got to make your room as dark as possible. Like the darker it is, the easier it is to stay asleep well until morning, which again, majority of my kids, when we make that change, almost instantly, like naps become an hour longer or the 4 a.m. wake ups just stop, especially this time of year. But there are certain kids, and I think parents kind of intuitively know this, that if they were in a totally dark room, it would be too big of a gradient or too big of a step for them. So having some kind of nightlight in the room can be helpful if you're, you know, if you need to be a little bit more hands-on with your child, like let's say if they're immobile or something. But it can give that sense of like reassurance for some children who might be a little bit more sensitive to that. The big question I always ask parents is like, is this something, or even for us adults, like, is this something that you can recreate if you were to stay in a hotel room, or if you're going to this person's place or that person? So like, you know, having a lamp, usually we can find some other light source to duplicate or try to recreate what we have at home. But if the answer is like, no, this is not something that I could potentially recreate, then that might cause some issues down the line.
Some trouble, yes. I think that's another very important point, is whatever strategies you're implementing, to be able to replicate that in later in life, but also in different environments. So if you are going to go on a family trip, if it is a bedtime story that you read and then you write stuff down, or you put pictures in a book when they're not writing yet, and then perhaps having something soft to sleep with, or you know, some sensory input before, and there's a routine that can all be replicated. But something that is specific on the roof, and this is an important point, because a lot of people have, you know, they might have the glow in the dark stars on the roof. And then what do we need to pack everything up every time we're going on a family holiday, and then do it exactly the same? Or so that's a very important point, is to implement the strategies that you can replicate.
Exactly. Okay. And you don't have to like overthink it either. I mean, then specifically with traveling, like that is the number one question I get from parents after we finish working with each other. Like, all right, how do we do this vacation thing? Like, seriously, how do we do this? And you know, the two things I recommend to parents is that, you know, we've all worked on that independence and things like that. So just make sure you have it set up so that can still happen in the best way possible. But, just even bringing one or two things that are familiar to your child's sleep environment. So like you said, the soft plushy animal or the same blanket, like most of these things you can easily pack up in a suitcase, and that's that,
Like, even a sensory back or a sleep backpack that you can take with, and the child can feel more in control. Those are great. I think that's definitely going to help a parent. Are there any other practical tips that you would like to give parents that they can start with if they want to start sleep training? And then perhaps if they can consult you to just maybe provide people with your contact details.
Yeah, sure. So the first thing that I send out to all families when they first reach out to me are 5 tips, which are fairly easy to start implementing, but they're tips that when parents really do it consistently, sometimes like it has the potential of making the sleep situation like at least 50% better. So even if it's only a small amount of families who can do it fully consistently, if the potential is there, like do it, like, you got to. And look, some of them are very typical recommendations of like, make sure you have a consistent bedtime routine. But if your child does have some sensory needs, or if they have that kind of overstimulation from the day, like make sure that not only their practical needs are met, but some of those more sensory regulatory needs as well, like those have to be met. So that could be that massage or doing some time in a sensory swing, anything like that. Can be helpful. And we talked about like having a darker room, which again, like that's those things, one of those things that parents email me and they're like, we made it darker and now like they're waking up at 7 a.m. Like, what'd you do?
What happened? One of the things that we found with our therapy is don't do therapy where they sleep.
Oh yeah, that's a big one. Absolutely.
Because they usually go into that mode of, okay, I need to concentrate, I need to be focused when they see some of the materials, but their room needs to be, as if it's possible, very separate from the therapy.
Oh yeah, no, and actually it's funny you mentioned that, because again, with my adults that I've worked with, it's like, don't bring your laptop. There should be no office space. Like your bedroom is for sleep. It should be a happy, joyous, relaxing place. So absolutely, like what you do in that room during the day, like you're going to associate that with night, at nighttime as well. Now there are some families where like space wise there's nothing else they can do. So if there's something else that you can like adjust in the room before bedtime to just change it up slightly could be quite helpful.
That's a good point.
But I think the other, like the biggest one, and this is always a little easier said than done, is of course screen time. We have to be very careful with that. And of course a lot of kids have been on teletherapy and virtual school the last year and a half, so we've had to be in front of screens. Like we've really had no other choice. But if you are like, of course the first recommendation I make to families is like cut all screens at least an hour before bedtime. And that does include television as well. It's not as much blue light coming from a screen, but it's enough to stop melatonin being produced and dumping it into the system. So I do recommend at least doing that. But for some children that I've worked with, we've even had to put a cap on the screen time during the day. So some parents might cut it several hours before bedtime, but if a child is getting 2 hours, 3 hours of screen time during the day, that overstimulation of the system can ride out well into the nighttime. So
I think all of these things we need to implement it ourselves as well. Like you said, I started getting headaches and experiencing quite a few headaches, and I noticed that it's because of doing interviews until quite late in the night time. And then I rescheduled it, because we ourselves as adults, we need to implement these healthy strategies if we want to model also for our children that we're not tired, we got a good night's rest, all of these things are really important for all of us.
Yeah. And, children are very smart. And if they're like, well, why can I not look at devices? But mom is still like flipping
always
through
on her phone.
Like, it's not going to work. Kids are going to be like, nah, I got the loophole in the system.
I got this. I'm going to go to dad and tell him about mom.
Yeah.
It's so good.
Yeah, but I think there's simple things, but like I said, when parents do them consistently, it makes the process of getting a child sleeping independently or just sleeping better that much easier. And they're the first few things that even families I work with one-on-one, I'll tell them, like, you're going to take the next week and implement these things really consistently. And when parents do it, like I said, any other changes you make with the schedule, independence, whatever, it just becomes that much easier. Like I said before, I mean, every child's journey with independence and sleep is a little bit different. And there are many different methods that you can use with a child. But, in my experience, the more gradual, the better. Doing it even in the smallest tiny steps, like even if it's little tiny adjustments, but they're adjustments in the right direction, it doesn't matter. I mean, if it takes your kid 1 week, 2 weeks, 2 months, like that's all right.
It's going to make a massive difference in the long run.
Yeah, exactly. And the most important thing is that they know they've been successful with it. Like when you have success, it creates a little bit more motivation, not just for the kid, but for the parents as well. So you want, and especially in the beginning, you have to wait a little bit to get those successes, both for the kid and for you to say, like, okay, we're on the right track here. We've got this. But it's an amazing journey, I think, for a lot of kids and a lot of families. And like I said before, I mean, it just opens things up to being more independent in other places. And like that, for me, I mean, that's just, I'm blessed I'm blessed to see that each and every time I work with a family. It's incredible.
That's amazing. And that's exactly all of our parents' hopes and dreams, is to have an independent child. And like you said, that independence might be different from one kid to another. Exactly. It might be, but sleeping and later on toilet training, those are things that we want to make sure that they're independent with. So that's awesome. Thank you so much, Melissa, for chatting with me. If parents want to learn more about how you do your consultation, and if you can provide, you do online therapy, right? Online consultation.
Yeah, everything's virtual, even for my families here in Philadelphia. I don't travel.
Okay, that's good. How do they contact you then?
Yeah. So families can find me. So my website is melissadomansleepconsulting.com. You can also find me on Facebook, Melissa Doman Sleep Consulting. On Instagram, my handle is Special Needs Sleep Coach. And on my social media platforms, I mean, every week I'm posting new tips and, recommendations and all sorts of things. So at any point, if you're interested in learning more, reach out to me on any one of those and I'll get back to you.
Awesome. Yes, I've watched quite a few of your videos and it's very practical, and you answer questions that parents often ask, like, do I buy a weighted blanket? What about melatonin? But I'll let them go to your social media platforms to go and watch those videos, because I can speak to you until it's bedtime here. But thank you so much. And I will hopefully speak to you soon.
Great. Thank you so much, Carla. I really appreciate it.